The rifle bucked against Rebecca Hayes' shoulder for the third time in 40 seconds, and she knew before the round left the barrel that it would miss. 18 degrees before wind chill. Gale force gusts screaming across Fort Denali's northern qualification range at nearly 40 knots. Snow so thick she could barely see the target silhouettes at 300 meters, their black outlines flickering in and out of existence like ghosts refusing to be witnessed. Her breath came in short, controlled bursts. Her fingers, despite the tactical gloves rated to negative 40 Celsius, had lost feeling 12 minutes ago. The rifle, standard M24 SWS, no modifications, no thermal assistance, felt like it weighed twice what it should. Every muscle in her 118-pound frame strained to hold the weapon steady against a wind that wanted to rip it from her hands. 30 seconds, Hayes. Sergeant First Class Marcus Vance's voice cut through the howling wind like a blade. He stood 15 feet behind her, clipboard in hand, stopwatch running. His breath fogged in the Arctic air, but his eyes remained fixed on her prone form with the detached precision of a man measuring failure. Rebecca squeezed the trigger again. The round sailed wide. She watched it through her scope, tracked its trajectory as the wind caught it, and pushed it 2 feet left of the target's center mass. 2 hits, 60 seconds total, for required to pass. Time. Vance's voice carried no emotion, no disappointment, no satisfaction, just arithmetic. Rebecca lowered the rifle slowly. The cold had seeped so deep into her bones that standing up felt like an act of violence against her own body. She rose anyway, turned to face the man who had been her primary instructor for 16 weeks, and waited for the verdict she already knew was coming. 2 of 4. Vance made a notation on his clipboard. Qualification failure. Sergeant, the wind. The wind was identical for everyone, Hayes. He didn't look up. Recruit Morrison qualified with the same conditions. Recruit Patterson qualified. Recruit Delgado qualified with a perfect score. Morrison weighs 220. Patterson's built like a linebacker. They can physically stabilize against. Hayes! Now Vance looked at her. His eyes held something that might have been pity in another man. In him, it was simply acknowledgement of mathematical reality. This is just math. You can't stabilize because you don't have the mass. You can't compensate for the wind because you don't have the strength. Those aren't insults. They're measurements. Rebecca said nothing. You were told at week 4 that your body type presented challenges. You were told at week 8 that your qualification scores were trending below threshold. You were told at week 12 that alternative MWS assignments were available. Vance tucked the clipboard under his arm. You chose to continue. That's admirable. But admiration doesn't change physics. I hit the targets in standard conditions. Standard conditions aren't combat conditions. And this isn't combat. It's a qualification range with moderate environmental stress. If you can't perform here, you cannot be trusted to perform when lives depend on your accuracy. The words landed like rounds to chest. Rebecca had heard variations of them her entire life. Too small, too light, wrong shape for the job. She fought her way into every space she'd ever occupied, clawing against assumptions and statistics and quiet, reasonable voices that explained, with patience and data, why she wasn't built for what she wanted to be. You'll receive your administrative separation papers by morning, Vance continued. There's a transport leaving for Anchorage at 0600. You'll be on it. And that's it. That's it. Vance began walking toward the range building, then paused. Turned back. Hayes! For what it's worth, your fieldcraft scores were exceptional. Your tactical movement was among the best I've seen. Your ability to remain undetected in adverse conditions was genuinely impressive. A ghost of something crossed his face. But this is a shooting qualification, and you didn't shoot well enough. Sometimes the math just doesn't add up. He walked away. Rebecca stood alone on the frozen qualification range as snow swirled around her, and the temperature continued its relentless descent. 16 weeks of training. 16 weeks of proving every doubter wrong in every category except the one that mattered. 16 weeks of being told she was extraordinary in all the ways that didn't count and inadequate in the single way that did. She retrieved her rifle, cleared the chamber, and began to walk back to the barracks. If that opening hooked you, trust me, this story only gets more intense. Subscribe now for more real stories of courage and hit that notification bell. Now, Let me show you what happened next, because Rebecca Hayes' failure that night was about to become the most important thing that ever happened to her. The barracks were quiet when Rebecca returned. Most of her fellow recruits were still on the range, completing their own qualifications or helping others prepare. She'd been scheduled early, a small mercy in retrospect. At least she wouldn't have to walk past a dozen pitying faces on her way to pack. Her bunk was in the far corner, third rack from the wall, bottom level. She'd chosen on day one because it was closest to the emergency exit, farthest from the main door, with clear sight lines in three directions. Old habits, survival instincts she developed long before joining the military. Rebecca sat on the thin mattress and stared at her hands. They were still shaking, not from cold anymore, but from the slow metabolic crash that followed adrenaline and failure. She'd felt this before. After high school track, when she'd been cut for being too light to compete in distance events. After the EMT certification exam, when she'd scored highest in written but failed the physical carry test. After every door that had opened just wide enough to show her what was inside before slamming shut on her fingers. She began packing her gear. Methodical, efficient, the way she did everything. Outside, the wind continued to scream. At 2300 hours, the barracks door opened. Rebecca didn't look up. She assumed it was Vance returning with paperwork, or one of the other instructors performing a routine check. She heard footsteps approaching her bunk, measured, deliberate, military cadence but not standard, and continued folding her cold weather underlayers. Recruit Hayes. The voice was unfamiliar. Deep calm, with an accent she couldn't place. Rebecca looked up. The man standing at the foot of her bunk wore no rank insignia, no unit patches. His BDUs were solid black without camouflage pattern, and his boots were civilian-grade mountaineering rather than military issue. He was in his mid-40s, with a face that looked like it had been carved from stone and left out in weather for decades. Gray at the temples, eyes the color of Arctic ice. Who are you? Commander Ethan Cross. He didn't extend his hand. United States Navy. Currently attached to a Joint Operations Command that doesn't appear on any organizational chart you've ever seen. Rebecca stopped packing. Commander, I'm being administratively separated in the morning. If you're here about some kind of appeal, I'm not here about an appeal. Cross pulled a folding chair from the desk beside her bunk and sat down without asking permission. I'm here because 3 months ago, during winter survival training, you disappeared. I completed the exercise. No. You exceeded the exercise. You were supposed to evade observation for 8 hours. You evaded observation for 31. Cross leaned forward. We had thermal imaging on that valley. Hayes. We had drone surveillance. We had instructors specifically tasked with locating you. For 31 hours, you were a ghost. Rebecca remembered the exercise. She remembered the drainage ditch she'd found on the second day. A narrow, half-frozen channel carved into the permafrost, barely wide enough to contain her body. She remembered lying in that ditch for 4 hours straight, not moving, barely breathing, letting her body temperature drop until she became indistinguishable from the frozen ground around her. I found good concealment. You found impossible concealment. Thermal scanners should have picked up your heat signature. They didn't. Your body temperature dropped so low that you became invisible to equipment specifically designed to locate human beings in Arctic conditions. Cross reached into his jacket and produced a tablet. He turned it toward her. This is the thermal imagery from that day. Do you see yourself anywhere in this frame? Rebecca studied the image. She recognized the terrain, the ridgeline, the cluster of dead trees, the depression where she'd hidden, but there was no heat signature. No red or orange or yellow outline marking a human presence. Just cold blue nothing. I was there. I know you were there. I had to send a spotter on foot to physically locate you because our technology couldn't. Cross set the tablet on the bed beside her. Hayes, do you understand how unusual that is? The human body generates heat. Even in sub-zero conditions, even with thermal suppression gear, there should have been some signature. But you were below the detection threshold. My core temperature runs low. It always has. Your core temperature runs approximately 2 degrees below normal baseline, and under stress, it drops further rather than rising. Your resting heart rate is consistently below 65 BPM even in high adrenaline situations. Your ability to remain motionless for extended periods exceeds anything I've seen in 23 years of operating with the most elite soldiers on the planet. Rebecca stared at him. Commander, with respect, I just failed basic qualification because I can't hold a rifle steady in high wind. Whatever you think you saw in that exercise doesn't change the fact that I can't shoot. Cross smiled. It was a small expression, barely a movement of his lips, but it transformed his face from stone to something almost human. Hayes, you can't shoot under conditions designed for soldiers who weigh 200 pounds. That's not the same as not being able to shoot. Cross stood and walked to the barracks window. Outside, the blizzard had intensified. Visibility had dropped to less than 20 meters. The wind howled against the reinforced glass, like something alive and hungry. 90 miles from here, inside territory controlled by hostile forces, there's a mountain ridge. Elevation 11,000 feet. Sheer faces on 3 sides. The only approach is a 12-kilometer traverse through terrain that would kill most operators before they ever reach the objective. Rebecca listened. On that ridge, there's a man. His name isn't important. You'll never learn it, but his position is. He's a field intelligence officer with hostile special operations. Second in command of their entire Northwestern Theater. 15 years of experience. 43 confirmed kills, all precision work. Cross turned from the window. He's been eliminating our forward reconnaissance teams for 7 months. Every unit we send into that region disappears. Every sniper we deploy against him ends up dead. He's better than anyone we have. Then send more snipers. Send a team. We've tried. Teams generate heat signatures. Teams leave tracks. Teams make noise, consume resources, require extraction plans that create logistical footprints. Every team we've sent has been detected before they got within 3 kilometers of effective range. Cross's voice remained level. This man doesn't just shoot well. Hayes, he understands operational patterns. He knows how American units move, how we communicate, how we think. He spent 15 years learning our playbook, and he uses that knowledge to predict our every move. So what are you proposing? Something he can't predict. Something that doesn't exist in any playbook he's ever studied. Cross met her eyes. A single operator. No team. No conventional support. Someone who can traverse 12 kilometers of frozen terrain without generating a detectable thermal signature. Someone who can remain motionless in sub-zero conditions for hours, days, if necessary, without degrading physically or psychologically. Someone who can take a single shot from 1,000 meters in 40-knot wind and then disappear before anyone knows where the round came from. Rebecca's stomach tightened. You're describing an impossible mission. I'm describing a mission that's impossible for everyone except you. Commander, I failed qualification today. I hit 2 targets out of 4. You hit 2 targets out of 4 while lying prone on a flat range with no concealment, no tactical advantage, and wind conditions that would challenge operators twice your size. Cross walked back to her bunk and picked up the tablet. He swiped to a new image, a topographic rendering of a mountain ridge, with elevation markers and wind direction indicators. This is the target location. Notice the terrain features. Notice the approach angle. Notice the elevation differential between the firing position and the target. Rebecca studied the image. The ridge was jagged, full of natural depressions and rock formations. The approach route followed a series of switchbacks that would shield an operator from direct observation. The firing position itself was nestled in a crevice between 2 granite outcroppings. You wouldn't be shooting from a flat range, Cross continued. You'd be shooting from a stabilized position with natural windbreaks on 3 sides. The wind at your firing point would be less than half what you experience today, and you wouldn't need to make 4 shots in 60 seconds. You'd need to make 1 shot, 1 round, 1 target, at 1,000 meters. At 1,000 meters, Cross didn't blink. With custom subsonic ammunition, with a suppressed platform designed for exactly this type of engagement, with hours, potentially days, to calculate wind speed, air density, temperature differential, bullet drop, and Coriolis effect. Rebecca felt something shifting in her chest. Not hope. She learned how to trust hope, but something adjacent to it. Recognition. Maybe the first faint pulse of being seen. Why me? She asked. There have to be other operators with my build. other snipers who can tolerate cold. There are operators with your build. None of them have your thermal profile. None of them have your patience. Cross set the tablet down. Hayes, I reviewed every after-action report from your 16 weeks here. Your fieldcraft scores were in the 98th percentile. Your tactical movement was ranked third out of 147 recruits. Your ability to remain undetected exceeded the training parameters. You actually broke the scoring rubric because they didn't have a category for what you did. None of that matters if I can't. And your marksmanship scores in control conditions were perfect. Cross-cutter off. Every static range. Every indoor qualification. Every zero-win scenario. You didn't miss. You didn't even come close to missing. He leaned forward. Hayes, you're not a bad shooter. You're a shooter who's been evaluated using metrics designed for soldiers built like linebackers. Sergeant Vance was right. It is just math. But he was using the wrong equation. The wind screamed outside. The barracks shuddered. If I say yes, Rebecca said slowly, what happens? You leave tonight. Modified Blackhawk, unmarked. No flight plan file with any command structure. We brief en route. You insert at 0300 into hostile territory, traverse to the ridge, and wait when the target presents himself. And he will, because he moves predictably at dawn. You take the shot. Then you move 15 kilometers to an extraction point, and we pull you out. And if I don't make it to extraction? Cross was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket again and produced a small device, black plastic, rectangular, with a single recessed button. Dead man switch. 8-hour check-in cycle. If you miss a check-in, we know you're compromised. After 12 hours without contact, your file is permanently erased. Your family receives notification of a medical discharge. All records of this conversation, this mission, and your participation in it cease to exist. Rebecca took the device. It was lighter than she expected. No one will know I was there. That's the point. Cross stood. The operators I recruit don't exist in any official capacity. They don't receive medals. They don't attend ceremonies. They don't tell stories at reunions. They do the work that keeps this country safe, and then they disappear, because the work requires disappearing. Rebecca stared at the dead man's switch in her palm. 8 hours of existence at a time. 12 hours between her and official non-existence. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Most recruiters would hide the risks. Most recruiters are trying to fill quotas. I'm trying to find someone who understands what they're walking into and chooses to walk anyway. Cross moved toward the barracks door. Hayes, you spent your entire life being measured by standards that weren't designed for you. You've been told you're too small, too light, wrong shape for the work you want to do. And every time someone told you that, they were using equations that treated your differences as deficits. He paused at the door. I'm offering you a different equation. One where everything they called a weakness becomes a weapon. Your low thermal signature, your ability to disappear, your patience, your tolerance for cold that would incapacitate operators twice your size. His hand rested on the doorframe. The mission I'm describing would kill 99% of the special operators in the United States military. Not because they're not good enough, but because they're too detectable, too dependent on support structures, too visible to the equipment our enemies use. And I'm not. You're a thermal ghost, Hayes. You're a negative space where a soldier should be. That's not a flaw. That's a superpower, if you're willing to use it. Rebecca stood. The folded clothes on her bunk suddenly seemed insignificant, artifact of a life that had ended the moment she missed those 2 shots on the qualification range. She looked at the dead man's switch again. When do we leave? Cross smiled that small, rare smile. Wheels up in 30 minutes. Pack light. Everything you need will be on the helicopter. He disappeared into the blizzard. Rebecca stood motionless for several seconds, processing. Then she began unpacking her bag and repacking it with only essentials. The thermal underlayers, her cold weather gloves, the protein bars she'd stashed for emergencies. Everything else stayed behind. Evidence of a life that was about to become a medical discharge on paper, and something else entirely in reality. 31 minutes later, she was strapped into the cargo bay of a modified Blackhawk helicopter, watching for it Denali shrink into a cluster of lights below as they climbed into clouds thick enough to hide the stars. Commander Cross sat across from her, tablet in hand. The helicopter's interior was stripped of standard military markings. The crew chief wore no insignia. The pilot's helmet was solid black. Flight time is approximately 2 hours to the insertion point, Cross said, raising his voice above the rotor wash. We brief now, because once you're on the ground, you'll have no contact with anyone until extraction. Rebecca nodded. Cross swiped the tablet, pulling up a topographic display. The target's name is classified at a level you don't have access to, so we're calling him Ghost 1. He operates from a concealed position on the northern face of Ridge 77. That's the designation for the mountain we showed you earlier. His pattern is consistent. He moves to an observation post at dawn, remains there for approximately 2 hours while conducting surveillance of the valley approaches, then withdraws to a secondary position for the remainder of the day. 2 hours isn't a large window. It's the only window. Ghost 1 is a professional. He doesn't expose himself unnecessarily. He doesn't make mistakes. Cross swiped to another image, a grainy photograph showing a figure in white camouflage against a snow-covered ridge. This is the only image we have of him. It was taken by a reconnaissance satellite 3 months ago. The operator who was supposed to act on this intelligence was killed before he could get within effective range. How? Ghost 1 detected him at 2 kilometers. Our operator never saw the shot coming. Cross's voice remained level, but something flickered behind his eyes. That's why this mission requires someone who can't be detected. Not by thermal imaging, not by visual observation, not by the instinct of man who survived 15 years of hunting and being hunted. Rebecca studied the photograph. The figure was barely visible, a white shape against white terrain, distinguished only by the slight shadow it cast and the angular lines of a rifle barrel. What's my firing position? Cross swiped to a terrain analysis. You'll establish here, designation point Echo. It's a natural crevice approximately 4 meters wide and 2 meters deep, positioned 800 meters southeast of Ghost 1's observation post. The approach requires ascending approximately 200 meters of near vertical terrain, but the crevice itself provides complete concealment and natural wind shielding. 800 meters? 800 to 1,000, depending on where Ghost 1 positions himself within his observation area. You'll need to calculate exact distance once you're in position. The rifle will be zeroed for 900 meters. You'll adjust from there. Rebecca committed the terrain to memory. She'd always had this ability, the capacity to look at a map or an image and retain it completely, reconstructing it behind her closed eyes whenever she needed to reference it. Environmental factors? Temperature at ridge elevation will be approximately negative 30 Celsius before wind chill. Wind speed at your firing position should remain below 20 knots due to the natural shelter of the crevice, but gusts may exceed that during the shot window. Air density at 11,000 feet is approximately 15% lower than at sea level. You'll need to factor that into your ballistic calculations. What about extraction? Cross's expression shifted slightly. That's the complicated part. Extraction is 15 kilometers from your firing position. Cross continued. Once you take the shot, you'll have approximately 30 minutes before hostile QRF reaches your location. That 30-minute window is based on response time analysis from previous engagements, but it could be shorter if Ghost 1 has rapid response assets pre-positioned. 15 kilometers in 30 minutes. On mountain terrain. In sub-zero conditions. No. Cross shook his head. You won't make extraction in 30 minutes. No one could. What you'll do is disappear. Move away from your firing position using the terrain features we've identified. He highlighted a route on the tablet. And go to ground before their response teams reach the area. You'll wait them out. Let them search. Let them tire. Let them decide you've already escaped or never existed in the first place. And then you move at night. Slow. Careful. Using the same skills that made you invisible during winter survival training. 15 kilometers over 12 to 18 hours. Depending on conditions. The extraction point is a cliff face on the eastern slope of the mountain range. We'll have a helicopter standing by in international airspace, ready to move in as soon as you signal. Rebecca processed this. 18 hours of movement through hostile territory. 18 hours of sub-zero exposure. 18 hours of hunting and being hunted. What's my loadout? Custom suppressed sniper platform. You'll zero it before insertion. Subsonic ammunition. 30 rounds total. Thermal suppression overgarments rated to negative 40 Celsius. NVGs for night movement. Standard survival kit. 2 liters of water in insulated containers. 48 hours of caloric rations. Cross paused. And the dead man switch. No sidearm. A sidearm adds weight and creates contingency scenarios. If you're in a position where you need a sidearm, you're already compromised beyond recovery. Cross met her eyes. This mission succeeds through invisibility, not firepower. You're not an assault element. You're a precision instrument. One shot, one target, then gone. The helicopter banked slightly, and Rebecca watched the clouds thin below them. She could see terrain now, mountains vast and dark, stretching to a horizon she couldn't identify. What happens after? She asked. If I make it back, you'll be medically discharged from the United States military. That's what your official record will show. That's what your family will be told. Cross set the tablet aside. In reality, you'll be reassigned to a unit that doesn't exist on any organizational chart. You'll train with operators who, like you, don't officially serve. You'll conduct missions that never happened, in places we were never present, against enemies who officially died of other causes. And I'll never be acknowledged. Never. Cross leaned forward. Hayes, I need to be clear about this. If you succeed tonight, no one will know. If you save American lives, and you will, if you eliminate Ghost One, those lives will never know who saved them. The intelligence community will attribute the target's death to satellite surveillance or local assets. Your name will appear nowhere. Your service will be erased. Rebecca thought about Sergeant Vance's words on the qualification range. This is just math. You don't have the mass. You don't have the strength. I've been invisible my whole life, she said quietly. At least this time, it'll be on purpose. Cross nodded slowly. That's the answer I was hoping for. The helicopter descended to a cloud layer, and suddenly the world crystallized around them. Mountains rising like teeth against a sky full of stars, snow reflecting pale light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Rebecca had never seen terrain this hostile, this beautiful, this utterly indifferent to human presence. 5 minutes to insertion, the pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. LZ is cold. No thermal signatures within 2 kilometers. Cross began handing Rebecca equipment from a storage case beside his seat. The rifle came first, matte black finish, suppressor already attached, custom stock that looked like it had been designed for a smaller frame. She handled it carefully, feeling its weight, its balance. It felt right in her hands, like it had been waiting for her. Then the thermal overgarments, white and gray with no visible seams or fasteners. The NVG's compact and lightweight. The dead man switch, which she secured in an interior pocket close to her chest. Remember, Cross said as the helicopter began its final descent, Hour 1 is discomfort. Hour 3 is pain. Hour 6 is numbness. Hour 12 is when tissue damage begins. Know your limits. Respect the cold. But don't let it make your decisions. How do I signal for extraction? When you reach the cliff face, activate the switch and hold it for 3 seconds. We'll have a helicopter airborne within 15 minutes. They'll drop a fast rope system to your position and extract under fire if necessary. Under fire? If they've tracked you that far, yes. Cross's expression didn't change. Hayes, there's a non-trivial possibility that this mission doesn't end with extraction. You could be captured. You could freeze. You could be killed by Ghost One or his QRF or any of a dozen environmental factors we can't predict. I need you to understand that. I understand. Do you accept it? Rebecca looked out at the mountains, cold and enormous and completely unwelcoming. She thought about Fort Denali, about Sergeant Vance and his clipboard and his quiet declaration that math was math, about all the doors that had closed on her, all the equations that hadn't added up. I accept it. The helicopter touched down. The cold hit Rebecca like a physical blow the moment she stepped off the aircraft. -30 Celsius. The briefing had said, but numbers couldn't capture the reality of air that seemed to solidify in her lungs with every breath. She'd trained in Arctic conditions at Fort Denali. She'd survived winter exercises that would have killed most civilians. But this was different. This was cold with intent. Cold that wanted to end her. The helicopter lifted off before she'd taken 5 steps, its rotors whipping snow into a blinding vortex that swallowed the aircraft whole. Within seconds, she was alone, the only human being within 90 miles who was supposed to be here. Rebecca oriented herself using the terrain features she'd memorized during the briefing. The ridge, her objective, rose against the northern sky, its peak invisible in darkness. Between her position and the ridge lay 12 kilometers of ascending terrain. Frozen valleys, vertical rock faces, sections of ice that require careful navigation to cross without sound. She began moving. The first hour passed in silence. Rebecca kept her pace steady, not fast enough to generate excess heat, not slow enough to let the cold settle into her joints. She moved the way she'd always moved in fieldcraft exercises. Low, deliberate, using every shadow and depression for concealment even though no one was watching. Habits that had become instincts that Cross believed would keep her alive. At the 2-hour mark, she reached the base of the first significant elevation change, a near vertical rock face rising approximately 80 meters above her position. The briefing had identified this as a climbing segment, but the word climbing didn't capture the reality of frozen handholds and wind that tried to rip her from the rock with every exposed meter. Rebecca ascended. Her fingers found perches in crevices that were barely wider than her knuckles. Her boots scraped against ice-covered stone, searching for footholds that would support her weight. Twice, her grip slipped. Both times, she caught herself before falling. The cold made everything harder, made her muscles slower to respond, her joints stiffer, her reaction time fractionally compromised. By the time she reached the top of the face, her hands were trembling inside her gloves. Not from cold, not yet, but from exertion. She allowed herself 60 seconds of rest, pressed flat against a rock outcropping that sheltered her from the wind, and then continued. Hour 3 brought the pain Cross had promised. It started in her extremities, toes, fingers, the tip of her nose, and spread inward like a slow tide. Rebecca had experienced this before in training, but training always had an end point, a warm barracks waiting, instructors monitoring core temperatures, hot food and dry clothes, and the knowledge that survival was guaranteed. Here, there was no guarantee. She pushed through the pain, found the narrow valley that marked the halfway point of her approach, descended into its shadowed depths, where the wind died and the silence became so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. Hour 4. Hour 5. The terrain grew more treacherous as she approached the ridge. Ice gave way to loose shale. Shale gave way to exposed rock that required careful movement to avoid creating noise. Every step became a calculation: weight distribution, foot placement, the angle of her body relative to the slope. One mistake would send stones cascading downward, announcing her presence to anyone listening. At hour 6, the numbness arrived. It came first to her toes, a strange absence of sensation that was almost worse than the pain it replaced. Then her fingers. Then the outer edges of her ears, where the cold weather hood didn't quite seal against her skin. Rebecca stopped and pressed her back against a rock wall. She was approximately 800 meters from her firing position. The eastern sky held the first suggestion of gray. Dawn was coming, and with it, Ghost One's appearance at his observation post. She had to move faster. But moving faster meant generating heat, and generating heat meant becoming visible to thermal imaging. And becoming visible meant dying before she ever reached her target. The mathematics of survival. Cross had been right. Everything came down to equations. But these equations were different from the ones Vance had used on the qualification range. These equations valued what she was, not what she lacked. Rebecca resumed her approach. At hour 7, she reached Point Echo. The crevice was exactly as the briefing had described, 4 meters wide, 2 meters deep, with natural rock formations providing shelter from wind on 3 sides. She lowered herself into the depression and immediately felt the difference. The wind that had been a constant assault reduced to occasional gusts, the temperature marginally less brutal. She established her firing position, assembled the rifle it had traveled disassembled in her pack, protected from the elements, verified the zero by checking the scope alignment against known terrain features. Calculated distance to the observation post, 940 meters to the center of the target area, with possible variations of plus or minus 60 meters, depending on Ghost One's exact position. Then she waited. Waiting was what Rebecca did best. She discovered this about herself during winter survival training, the capacity to become absolutely still, to let time pass around her without requiring anything from it. Other recruits had struggled with the psychological weight of inaction. They'd fidgeted, shifted, created noise and movement that betrayed their positions. Rebecca had simply existed, present but motionless. Alert but calm. Hour 8. The dead man switch required activation. Rebecca pressed a button and felt it vibrate once. Confirmation that her check-in had registered. Somewhere, presumably, Commander Cross was watching a display that showed her as still operational. Dawn arrived slowly in the mountains. The gray in the eastern sky deepened, then began to warm toward pale gold. Shadows shifted. The terrain that had been featureless darkness revealed itself in shades of white and gray and occasional dark stone. At 0617, Ghost One appeared. He emerged from a concealed position approximately 900 meters from Rebecca's location, a shadow separating itself from the mountainside with the fluid precision of someone who had been doing this for 15 years. Even at distance, through her scope, she could see the economy of his movements. No wasted motion, no hesitation. He settled into his observation post the way a predator settles into a hunting crouch, complete stillness punctuated by slow, deliberate scanning of the terrain below. Rebecca watched him through her scope. Her crosshairs rested on center mass, but she didn't take the shot. Not yet. The wind at her position was gusting unpredictably, 15 knots, then 22, then back to 12. She needed a window of relative stability. She needed to calculate for the conditions she would actually fire in, not the conditions she hoped for. The mathematics began. Air density at 11,000 feet, approximately 15% lower than sea level. Bullet drop over 940 meters with subsonic ammunition. Compensate by aiming approximately 4 feet high. Wind speed at target location. Estimated 18 knots in the northwest based on snow movement near Ghost One's position. Coriolis effect at this latitude, minimal but present. Compensate by approximately 2 inches right. Temperature differential between her firing position and the target area. Significant. The cold affected bullet trajectory in ways that standard ballistic tables didn't fully capture. Rebecca had learned this during her failed qualification at Fort Denali, learned it by watching her rounds drift in ways the theoretical calculations didn't predict. She adjusted her aim, then adjusted again. Ghost One remained in his observation post, his own rifle scanning the valley below. He was hunting, Rebecca realized. Hunting for American reconnaissance teams that weren't coming. Hunting for the operators he'd killed before. He had no idea that the hunter was already here, concealed in a crevice less than a kilometer away, with crosshairs centered on his chest. The wind dropped. Rebecca's breath steadied. She slowed her heart rate through the breathing techniques she'd learned during basic training. Techniques designed for exactly this moment. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4 seconds. Exhale for 4 seconds. Let the body settle into a rhythm that removed the tremor from her hands and the urgency from her thoughts. 15 knots. 12 knots. 8 knots. Now, Rebecca squeezed the trigger with the same smooth pressure she'd practiced 10,000 times on ranges across 3 continents. The rifle whispered rather than roared, the suppressor eating the sound, reducing it to a soft mechanical cough that vanished into the wind. For 1.6 seconds, the round traveled. She watched through her scope as Ghost One's body jerked once, a violent, uncontrolled spasm that told her everything she needed to know about shot placement, and then collapsed sideways into the snow. He didn't move, didn't attempt to return fire, didn't radio for help. The most dangerous enemy sniper in the Northwestern Theater was dead. Rebecca remained in position. Standard protocol dictated waiting for confirmation, waiting for secondary movement, for signs of body armor having absorbed a round, for any indication that the target was playing dead. She counted seconds in her head. 30, 60, 90, no movement. At 2 minutes, she began breaking down her firing position. Every cartridge case accounted for. She'd only fired 1 round, but she checked anyway. Every piece of equipment secured. Every trace of her presence eliminated. At 3 minutes, she moved. The extraction point was 15 kilometers southeast. The briefing had estimated 12 to 18 hours of travel time, depending on conditions and enemy response. Rebecca began her descent from Point Echo, moving with the same deliberate precision that carried her up the mountain. She'd made it approximately 800 meters when the mortar round hit. The explosion came without warning, a deafening blast that threw snow and rock fragments in every direction and sent Rebecca tumbling down a slope she'd been carefully descending. She rolled twice, 3 times, came to rest against a boulder that knocked the wind from her lungs. For several seconds, She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The world was noise and chaos and the acrid smell of explosives. Then training took over. Rebecca scrambled into cover behind the boulder, checking her body for wounds. Her left leg screamed in protest when she tried to move it. Not the sharp, immediate pain of a shrapnel hit, but deeper ache that suggested impact injury. She'd hit something during the fall. Knee, maybe, or ankle. Hard to tell through the adrenaline. A second mortar round landed 40 meters to her right, then a third, 60 meters to her left. They were bracketing her position, adjusting fire based on her location. Someone had seen her shot. Someone had tracked the trajectory. Someone had called in fire support. Rebecca moved. She abandoned cover discipline, abandoned careful foot placement, abandoned everything except raw survival speed. The mortars continued falling, close, then farther, then close again as the enemy fire controllers tried to anticipate her movement. Snow exploded around her in dirty brown clouds. Rock fragments pepper her thermal overgarments. 400 meters, 600, 800. The firing stopped. Rebecca dove into a ravine and pressed herself against the frozen ground, listening. The silence stretched for 30 seconds. 45, a minute. Then she heard it. Rotors, a helicopter approaching from the northwest. The aircraft appeared over the ridgeline like a mechanical predator, sleek, fast, painted in winter camouflage that made it nearly invisible against the snow-covered terrain. Rebecca recognized the silhouette. A Me-24 Hind, Russian-designed attack helicopter modified for special operations support. Thermal imaging, door gunners, the ability to hover and hunt. It was searching for her. Rebecca pressed herself deeper into the ravine, feeling the cold rock against her back. The thermal suppression overgarments were designed to mask her heat signature, but she didn't know how effective they'd be against military-grade imaging equipment at close range. She didn't know if the cold she'd absorbed over the past 8 hours would make her invisible or simply less visible. The helicopter swept across the terrain in a methodical search pattern. She watched it through gaps in the rock formation, watched its sensor pod rotating, scanning, hunting. It passed within 200 meters of her position, then 300. Then it banked and came back. Rebecca stopped breathing. The aircraft hovered directly above her ravine. She could feel the rotor wash even through the rock, could hear the mechanical whine of its engines cycling. Snow swirled in the downdraft. Time became meaningless, seconds stretching into eternities as the helicopter's sensors probed the terrain. Then it moved on. Rebecca allowed herself 3 breaths. Then she assessed her situation. Her left leg was compromised. The fall during the mortar barrage had done something to her knee. Hairline fracture, she guessed, or torn ligament. Either way, she couldn't run, couldn't move quickly. The 15 kilometers to extraction had just become significantly more difficult. The helicopter was circling back. It would continue searching until dark, probably, and dark was 8 hours away. She couldn't stay in this ravine for 8 hours. The cold would take her before the helicopter did. Rebecca began crawling. Movement in a prone position was agonizingly slow, but it kept her close to the frozen ground, minimized her thermal silhouette, reduced the chance of visual detection. She dragged herself along the ravine floor, using her arms and her one good leg to propel herself forward, biting down against the pain that flared with every motion of her injured knee. 100 meters, 200, 300. The ravine ended at a steep descent into a broader valley. Rebecca paused at the edge, scanning the terrain below. The helicopter had moved to the northwest, but it would return. It always returned. She slid down the descent on her stomach, controlling her speed with her hands and arms, landing in a snow bank that partially absorbed her impact. The valley floor offered less cover, more exposed terrain, fewer natural concealment features, but it also offered easier movement than the rocky slopes above. Rebecca checked her watch. 9 hours since insertion. The dead man switch would require activation again soon, and she was nowhere near extraction. She pressed the button, felt it vibrate once. Then she kept moving. The valley stretched for approximately 3 kilometers before rising into another ridge system. Rebecca navigated by memory, recalling the topographic maps from the briefing, matching terrain features to mental images. Her pace was slower than she'd planned. The injured leg forced her to adopt a limping gait that added time to every kilometer. Hour 10. The helicopter had passed overhead twice more, but each time the thermal suppression gear had held. Rebecca was becoming the cold itself, her body temperature dropping to levels that would concern any medic, her extremities losing sensation in ways that signaled the beginning of real damage. Hour 12. The dead man switch activated automatically, and Rebecca felt a surge of dark humor. 12 hours, Cross had said. The threshold for tissue damage. The threshold for official erasure. She was right on schedule. The sun had passed its peak and begun descending toward the western mountains when Rebecca reached the final ridge. The extraction point, the cliff face Cross had described, was visible below, a sheer drop of approximately 200 meters with a narrow ledge at the base. The helicopter pickup would happen there, if she could reach it. Between her position and the cliff face lay 1,500 meters of exposed terrain. Rebecca assessed the situation with the cold clarity that extreme physical stress sometimes produces. Her injured leg could barely support weight anymore. The adrenaline that kept her moving was fading, replaced by a grinding exhaustion that made every step feel like wading through concrete. Her thermal overgarments were torn in 3 places from the mortar fragments and the ravine descent. Her ammunition count was 29 rounds remaining from the original 30, and somewhere behind her, the helicopter was still hunting. She waited for darkness. The sun set slowly in the mountains, a gradual fade from gray to purple to black that seemed to take hours. Rebecca used the time to rest, to let her body recover what little it could, to plan her final approach. The cliff face would require careful navigation, even with 2 functional legs. With 1 compromised leg in deteriorating physical condition, it might be impossible. But impossible was the mission she'd signed up for. At 2100 hours, full darkness had settled over the terrain. Rebecca activated her NVGs, and the world bloomed into shades of green. She could see the cliff face clearly now, could trace the route she needed to take, could identify the ledge where extraction would happen. She began her final movement. The terrain fought her every step of the way. Loose shale shifted underfoot, threatening to send her tumbling into the darkness. Ice patches appeared without warning, forcing her to test each foothold before committing her weight. Her injured leg screamed in constant protest, the pain graduating from sharp to dull to something beyond sensation entirely. 500 meters. 700. 1,000. Rebecca paused behind a rock formation, her breath coming in harsh gasps that she struggled to control. The cold had settled so deep into her core that she couldn't remember what warmth felt like. Her fingers had stopped responding to commands several hours ago. She'd been working the rifle by muscle memory and willpower alone. 1,200 meters. 1,300. The helicopter returned. She heard it before she saw it, the distinctive thrum of rotors cutting through the night air. Rebecca dropped into a depression between 2 boulders, pulling her thermal gear tight around her body, pressing herself against the frozen ground. The aircraft swept across the ridgeline, its searchlight stabbing to the darkness in brilliant white arcs. It was flying a grid search now, methodical, patient. The pilot and crew knew she was somewhere in this area. They just didn't know exactly where. Rebecca watched the searchlight pass within 30 meters of her position. Then it moved on, tracking west, searching terrain she'd already crossed. 1,400 meters. 1,450. The cliff face loomed ahead, a dark vertical wall that seemed to swallow the starlight. Rebecca could see the ledge now, could see the narrow strip of rock where Cross had promised extraction would happen. She was close. So close. She was 50 meters from the ledge when the helicopter spotted her. The searchlight swung around with terrifying speed, pinning her in a column of white light that turned the night into day. For 1 frozen second, Rebecca was completely exposed, a small figure silhouetted against the snow, clearly visible, clearly human. Then she moved, not toward the ledge, toward cover. A cluster of boulders to her right offered partial concealment, and she threw herself behind them as a helicopter's door gunner opened fire. Tracers lanced through the darkness, brilliant red lines that stitched across the terrain in rapid succession. Snow erupted around her position. Rock fragments sprayed from boulder impacts. Rebecca unslung her rifle. The helicopter was hovering approximately 300 meters out, maintaining position, while its crew tried to acquire her behind the boulder cover. Its side door was open, the door gunner visible in silhouette as he worked the mounted weapon. 300 meters. 40-knot rotor wash creating turbulent air between her position and the target, a moving platform. A single exposed shooter. Rebecca Hayes had been told her entire life that she couldn't shoot under challenging conditions. She steadied her breathing, found her heartbeat, let the chaos around her fade into background noise. The rifle spoke twice. The first round caught the door gunner in the chest, throwing him back into the helicopter's interior. The second round, fired before the first had even landed, punched through the aircraft's side window, striking something vital within. The helicopter lurched, its rotors suddenly uneven, and began a rapid descent toward the mountainside. It crashed 400 meters away. The explosion lit the night sky in orange and red, and Rebecca felt the heat wash over her position like a brief, bitter reminder of what warmth had been. She had 14 rounds remaining. The ledge was 50 meters away. Rebecca Hayes began the final approach. Her injured leg had progressed beyond pain into a numb uselessness that she had to drag behind her like dead weight. Every step required conscious effort. The deliberate placement of her functional foot, the shifting of her weight, the hauling of her compromised limb across terrain that seemed designed to kill her. 40 meters. 30. 20. She reached the ledge. The cliff face dropped away below her. 200 meters of vertical stone, descending into darkness. Rebecca slumped against the rock wall, her body finally allowed to acknowledge the abuse it had endured. 18 hours of movement, sub-zero exposure, combat injury, 2 confirmed kills, including an enemy helicopter. She activated the dead man switch and held the button for 3 seconds. Somewhere in international airspace, a helicopter crew received the signal. 15 minutes. Cross had said extraction would arrive within 15 minutes. Rebecca unslung her rifle and established a firing position facing the direction she'd come. If enemy QRF was following her, and they probably were, given the helicopter crash, they would approach from the northeast. She had 14 rounds. She had limited cover. She had a leg that couldn't support movement. This ledge was where she would make her stand. The first enemy soldiers appeared at the ridgeline approximately 8 minutes after her signal. Rebecca counted 4 through her scope. White camouflage, professional movement. Rifles up. They were approaching cautiously, using terrain for cover, communicating with hand signals. She let them get closer. 700 meters. 600. 500. At 450 meters, she began firing. The first soldier dropped before anyone realized they were under attack. The second fell as the others dove for cover. The third scrambled behind a boulder, exposing his legs. Rebecca adjusted her aim and fired twice, watching him collapse. The fourth returned fire. Rounds snapped against a rock wall beside her, and Rebecca shifted position, difficult with her injured leg, but necessary. She couldn't let them fix her location, couldn't let them establish fire superiority. 11 rounds remaining. A fifth soldier appeared. A sixth. They were spreading out now, trying to flank her position, using the terrain to mask their approach. Rebecca tracked them through her scope, waiting for clean shots, conserving ammunition. 9 rounds. 7. 5. The helicopter arrived. It wasn't a Black Hawk. Smaller, more maneuverable, painted in flat black that absorbed the moonlight rather than reflecting it. It swept over the cliff face with rotors screaming, deploying a fast rope system from its open cargo door. Rebecca saw the rope uncoil, saw it snap taut against the cliff edge, saw a figure already descending. Commander Cross. He hit the ledge running, a compact submachine gun in his hands. Hayes, move. Rebecca tried to stand. Her injured leg buckled immediately, and she collapsed against the rock wall. Cross was beside her in seconds, hauling her upright, supporting her weight with his shoulder. I've got you. Go. Go. The enemy's soldiers were still firing. Rounds cracked past their position as Cross half carried her toward the fast rope. A crew member in the helicopter's door was returning fire with a mounted weapon, suppressing the enemy positions while they extracted the rope. Rebecca grabbed it with hands that could barely feel, wrapping around her arm the emergency technique she'd been taught. Cross secured a carabiner to her harness. She hadn't even realized she was wearing a harness, had forgotten the extraction gear she'd been given during the briefing. Go! Cross shouted. The helicopter began to climb. Rebecca felt herself lifted from the ledge, felt the mountain falling away below her, felt the cold wind cutting through her torn thermal overgarments as the aircraft accelerated away from the combat zone. She ascended the rope by willpower alone. Her arms shouldn't have been able to function. The cold had been too severe, the exertion too prolonged. But she climbed anyway. Climbed because the alternative was falling. Climbed because she hadn't come this far to die in the last 30 seconds. A crew member grabbed her harness and hauled her into the helicopter's cargo bay. She collapsed on the metal floor, her body finally surrendering to the accumulated damage of 18 hours of impossible survival. The helicopter banked hard and accelerated. Below them, the mountain receded into darkness. Rebecca lay on the cargo bay floor, staring at the ceiling, listening to her own ragged breathing. Commander Cross appeared in her field of vision, crouching beside her with a medical kit. "Hairline fracture in your left fibula," he said, running a scanner over her leg. "Probable torn ligaments in the knee. Moderate hypothermia. Several hours of tissue damage from cold exposure." He looked up. "You'll be in recovery for 6 to 8 weeks. The target? Confirmed dead. Your shot was clean. 1 round, center mass, instant incapacitation." Cross set the scanner aside. Ghost One's elimination triggered a complete collapse of their command structure. "We're already seeing the effects. Their units are pulling back. Their operations are fragmenting. You've created a 72-hour window that will be exploiting at every level." Rebecca closed her eyes. 72 hours. All those reconnaissance teams that Ghost One had killed. All those operations he disrupted. And now the Americans would have 3 days to act before the enemy could reorganize. "My record shows a medical discharge from basic training at Fort Denali. Your family has been notified that you were injured during a training accident and are recovering at a military hospital." Cross paused. "Your actual recovery will take place at a facility that doesn't appear on any map. When you're mobile again, you'll begin training with a unit that doesn't officially exist. And I'll never be acknowledged. You'll never be acknowledged publicly." Cross placed a hand on her shoulder. "But the people who matter will know what you did. The operators you'll serve with will know. And the lives you save. Every mission, every target, every impossible situation where your particular skills make the difference. Those lives will be your legacy." The helicopter leveled off, climbing toward cruising altitude. Through the open cargo door, Rebecca could see stars, cold and distant and more beautiful than anything she'd ever noticed before. "Commander," she said quietly, "Sergeant Vance told me I failed qualification because the math didn't add up. He said I was too small, too light. He said I couldn't stabilize a rifle in high wind. Vance was measuring you against standards designed for a different kind of soldier." Cross leaned back. "He wasn't wrong about the math. He was using the wrong equation. Your body mass is a deficit in a qualification scenario designed for 200-pound operators. It's an asset in a solo covert insertion where thermal invisibility is the primary requirement. So I didn't fail basic training." "No." Cross shook his head slowly. "You exceeded it. You just exceeded it in a category they don't measure, using capabilities they don't evaluate. The instructors at Fort Denali were doing their job, testing you against criteria they'd been given, but those criteria were never built to identify someone like you." Rebecca let that sink in. Her entire life, she'd been measured and found wanting. Too small, too light, wrong shape. Every equation had concluded that she didn't add up, that she was missing essential components, that no amount of effort could compensate for what she simply didn't have. And now here she was, in a helicopter flying away from a mountain where she'd accomplished what no conventional operator could have accomplished, recruited into a unit that didn't exist because she possessed exactly the capabilities that no one had ever thought to value. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now you recover. Then you train. Then we send you somewhere else impossible. And you do something else that no one will ever know about." Cross moved toward the front of the cargo bay. "Welcome to the unit, Hayes. We don't have a name. We don't have insignia. We don't appear in any organizational chart. But the work we do, the work you'll do, matters more than anything those qualification ranges were ever designed to measure." The helicopter climbed through the clouds, leaving the mountains far below. Rebecca Hayes, failed recruit, medical discharge, thermal ghost, closed her eyes and allowed herself to rest. She had been told her entire life that she didn't meet the standards. She had finally found people who understood that she operated in a category those standards were never built to measure. Rebecca Hayes' story shows us that failure isn't always failure. Sometimes it's just the wrong test for the right person. If this kept you engaged, hit that like button. Tell me in the comments, would you give up official recognition for a chance to prove what you're really capable of? Subscribe if you haven't already. More stories like this are coming. See you in the next one.